I've never attempted to pretend otherwise. It's currently July 14th, and I'm reading some writing I did on July 7th. I do this. I'll let things build up for a bit, and then start reading it off. I was out in the back, smoking some funny tobacco, and I had a thought. Some of the greatest thoughts I've ever had are while I'm engaging in that process, and so I ended up writing up this little bit of a piece here while I was rather baked, and the reason I'm pointing that out is because it should be kind of obvious, and I'm pretty sober right now, so I'm not going to get the right tone of voice as I'm reading it off. I wish I did. It's going to be, like I say, about 6 months, 7 months probably until we get legalization in Canada, and then I can kind of not worry about it, kind of thing. The reason I stopped the vlogs was because I wanted to. I felt uncomfortable recording myself in a head cave and then uploading it on the internet. That's like that's like dumb criminals, right? And I mean, what I'm doing is still a little edgy. It's still a little bit risky, especially considering that I know I'm being. See, I'm not sure. Is the fact that I'm being spied on, or was what I'm looking for here? Monitored. The fact that I'm being monitored, like, does that mean that I should be more concerned or less concerned because they'd be giving away their cover, right? Well, no, I mean, it's true. Like, if I wake up and so there's a cop at the door, and it turns out the reason there's a cop at the door is because they were monitoring me. But I mean, like, I'm uploading it to the internet. Anybody could watch it, right? Are they going to say that we just happened to stumble upon this? No, they'd have to admit that they're spying on me, right? And is that constitutional? And might I be able to launch a fun legal battle there? Right? Oh, I'd have great fun with it. Just give me a few more years. Let me finish my discography first, and then we can have great fun in court. It actually would be useful for marketing, right? So if I go through a long court battle and it goes right to the Supreme Court and I get a constitutional ruling, maybe people might check out my stuff, right? We're going to keep this introduction, but I'm going to start again. Okay, so I got to a point with physics where I just didn't believe what they were telling me. It took me some time to at least accept it as reasonable quantification for experimental use, but at the time I just flatly didn't believe the ideas. So I faded back into math, causality, and eventually hit the same crisis. If we need extra dimensions to model space properly, then we're stuck at an impossible impasse. We can only understand these extra dimensions as variables on a piece of paper. If the model is correct, we can never actually experience it. So we're left with the proof that we can never understand space. The triumph of science is that we're back where we started. Centuries, and we're back to the same point that Descartes was at. We may be able to at least contemplate glimpses. Consider a dog's sensory perception of the world around us. Dogs rely dramatically on scent and sound, which are more wave-based methods of energy transfer. Yeah, I know, light's a particle and a wave, I get it, but it oscillates too fast for us to experience it as anything but a particle. That's why we have such a bias to straight lines in Euclidean geometry, not because it reflects the surface, but because it's a function of our biology. We capture light moves in straight lines, therefore we construct the world rectilineally. It doesn't matter that we live in a sphere if the sphere is reflected in a rectangle. If we were dogs and relied more on smell and sound, we'd get a richer sensory perception. The slower moving wave reveals a deeper sense of reality. So we'd have a more developed concept of the density of space. We'd have evolved the ability to locate a smell in space and navigate the contours around its emission. Is that not a complexity in the understanding of space? Sure. Now, I just want to stop for a sec because we have to smell does not move at the speed of light, right? So, presuming that we have, the same level of vision that we have, we're going to see it, right? But our ability to smell it is going to be much slower. Now, I don't know if our brains can even bridge that gap, right? Or if we could just develop a more complex concept of vision, even. But I think that we'd probably be needing to deal with, like, in order to see smell, like, it is more in depth than having a heightened sense of smell, right? Or even a heightened sense of vision, which itself is, kind of interesting to think about in the way that our senses work together, right? And I'm just pointing out that I may have oversimplified this, right? When I talk about, navigating the contours around the emission of a smell, it's because the smell is not going to move at the speed of light. It's a little bit, the way that you may be conceiving of this is probably wrong, right? But nonetheless, I mean, if you watch a dog smell, like a bloodhound type of dog, the way that they move their nose, like up and down, and like they'll follow a smell through the air in a way that carves out a path, right? We can't do anything close to that, right? Like the ability to place the coordinates of a smell in three-dimensional space, that is a complexity in the understanding of space, right? Apparently humans retain the genes to be able to understand depth perception within magnetic fields. The radiation of outer particles may turn out to be less random than appears, instead traversing some path through complicated space, right? So, when we take our probability see, that's just lost me too here. Why can't I, our probability distributions, and we try to apply them to the way that, gases fill up space. We say that we don't appear to see a pattern here, so therefore we've deduced that it's random. That's one of the things that drives me crazy about physics, right? We can't find a pattern, so therefore it must be random. Well, maybe there is a pattern in there, you just don't understand it, right? And then they argue that, the probability distribution makes a reasonable approximation, so therefore that proves that it's random, right? It's like, no, that's actually a logical fallacy, believe it or not, right? Just because you come up with a good result doesn't mean that your assumption is good, right? But that's the kind of thinking that dominates physics nowadays, right? And it does drive me crazy, because it's not very rigorously grounded, and it's so complicated that, outside thinkers have a hard time doing peer review on it, right? Peer review is a great idea, but when you're talking about, when you have this sort of groupthink that gets in, and when you've only got such a small number of people that can actually understand it, the groupthink takes over on the peer review, right? What would be really great is if you could get the philosophy department to do peer review on the physics department. But how many people in the philosophy department can you find that can understand the physics? Not that many, right? Really understand it, right? So, I mean, there may be some pattern there. I mean, if we could understand, how many dimensions, these particles are oscillating through, it would better help us understand whether there is some kind of pattern in this emission or not, right? But I mean, that in itself is you're building things up on top of each other, right? If we want to talk about our ability to experience space and have an empirical understanding of space, we'd be better off starting not with the emission of odor, but the way that magnetic fields radiate, right? I think that some empirical concept of higher dimensional space would be plausible given this hypothetical genetic improvement by carrying out experiments that have side effects that we can actually sense. So, like I say, there are animals that can understand magnetic. A lot of them are like sea animals, which I think pretty much all of them are sea animals. I'm trying to think of a land animal that understands. There might be some insects. But we have these genes. They're there. They're just switched off, right? If we could switch those genes back on. See, in the world that we live in, if we could understand magnetic fields, we'd go crazy. Like, the sensory overload would just drive us nuts, which is probably why it was selected in the first place, right? As we became more complex, and we had more. See, that's the irony, right? As we had more in-depth ways to understand the world around us, as our concept of consciousness became more complicated, the noise of magnetic fields became too much. That's a guess, right? I wasn't there however many millions of years ago when it got switched off, but I'm gonna think that that's probably what most people would conclude. Most educated people would conclude, right? And the most experts is what I'm trying to get across, rather than just most educated. Most experts in the topic would probably tell you that, right? That it just became too much, and you would have had these, fish or whatever, just like seizuring in the corner because they can't deal with all of this information, right? And at this point, in the world that we live in, with cell phones and radio signals and everything else, creating all of this noise, if we understood, or we could sense magnetic fields and depth in magnetic fields, or the volume of the magnetic field, and I mean, I'm using language that's imprecise, but I'm trying to have it make sense in a sensory kind of way. I don't think we could. You couldn't walk down the street. You would fall down, and you would start seizuring and just like flipping out, right? But hypothetically, if we could, and we could do experiments that could, I don't know, like, would we see the magnetic field? Would we hear it? Would we feel it, like with our hands? Like, would it feel like a wind? Like, I don't know, right? We can't know. But if we could have some sense of it, and we could observe it, whatever that means, directly with our senses, then I think that we could get that empirical understanding of higher dimensional space by getting results of it, right? So we could do an experiment that creates like if you want to use the vision idea as an analogy, that creates a flash of light that comes out in space that we can experience as a consequence of something happening in more complex space, right? And then we could see that, right? But I think that, like, it's short of that. I don't know how we can experience higher dimensional space. And I mean, we can't all flip the switch, or at least I don't think we can. It's a question for biologists that are studying epigenetics, I suppose. I don't know what would flip the switch on. And even in at the level of the individual organism, it would not be immediate, right? It would take decades, probably, for the genetics to do whatever it would do. What would it do? Would it build new organs? Would it, would cell replacement on the, I mean, if you're my age, if you're 35 years old, there's not a cell in your body that's been there since you were born, right? You've been regenerated however many times. I don't know how many times, but a couple of times anyways. And so would you have to go through a process of full regeneration before you could, even if you were able to flip the switch on the epigenetics, right? Probably not. You probably have to have been born with it, right? And so you're dealing with kind of like crazy mad science, human cloning type stuff. And then you're talking about a privileged experience, right? You would be the only person in the world. And you may not even be a person anymore. You might be a different species. Still, all this, baked thinking here. See, don't let anybody tell you potheads are stupid. Okay, it can have a very useful means of thinking about things differently. But I mean, as with everything else, there's a kernel of truth in the idea that potheads are stupid, right? Because all that came about was about, like, all of that thinking came about thinking about a dog and how a dog experiences the world, right? It's not straight lines and right angles like we do, right? A dog's concept of space has swirls and bunches and nooks and crannies in it. This is space, empty space. And to a dog, it's lumpy, right? Which is kind of like what physicists tell us, is that space is lumpy. It's just we can't really experience it. And we've kind of proved that we probably never will be able to experience it. But a dog can experience a concept of lumpy space. It's not the same thing, but it's a lot closer. And so a dog has a better understanding of space than we do. Cool, huh?